Hey folks, how's it going? Thanks for checking the video out. I want to show you how to resurrect a dead snare drum, essentially. Often we'll get recordings that are less than desirable, whether it's microphone position, whether it's the instrument itself. We kind of just have to deal with it. So before we go any further, let's just take a listen to how this snare drum sounds before and then after we've done the processing. Okay, pretty significant difference there. First of all, I want to say thanks to the band who have got this this track together. This is a track called Bobby Nobody, and it's just one that I've downloaded from the Cambridge multitracks, which is a great source for getting some multitrack material for testing out. Educational purposes, so it's just to kind of show us what's going on. There's a link down the bottom. Anyway, so I just want to show you how I'm doing this, because this is going to work for different snare drums as long as you kind of know what you're looking for in the first place. And I've played it to you in the mix there because that's the important thing. It doesn't really matter how it sounds on its own, it's about getting it right in the mix. So it's a kind of a 3, 4, 5 step process, whatever it is, but it's just about understanding and thinking what is it that's missing at any given time. So let's jump in. So first of all, I want to show you exactly what's going on with the snare top and snare bottom. So we've got two tracks here: snare up, snare down, snare top, snare bottom. First of all, what we're doing is, if I just solo just these two for a moment, because this is going to enable you to hear the phase issues that are going on. So I've got Neutron 5 on a snare bottom mic, and being fed into that is the snare top mic. Now, ignore this transient shaper for a moment. Let's just turn phase off and then on again, and you'll hear that bottom end just kind of come back to life. So phase is extremely important. We need to make sure that we've got the top and bottom snare mics in phase, because otherwise we're just going to be losing that bottom end. Even if we haven't got too much of the bottom snare mic in the mix, it's still a significant issue. So that's kind of the first housekeeping thing. If you haven't got a bottom snare mic, then you can maybe check it against the overheads. But for me, this was a big issue. So we've got Neutron 5 on the phase module, a bit of phase rotation and a bit of delay. And I'm just hitting learn here, and it's just kind of doing it all for me. So housekeeping out of the way. Let's take a look at our actual snare top mic, because this is the one that's got the most significant change, I would say. First of all, I'm getting rid of a resonance. Now, resonances are only a problem when they're a problem. You don't have to go in and sweep and find the resonances, because if you look for them, you'll find them. There's a video at the top, down the bottom, about resonances and the problems with actually searching for these. But first of all, what I've gone for with this is a transient shaper. And you'll notice that with this module, or these modules in Neutron, I'm not actually applying any, should we say, traditional processing. That's coming afterwards. But this is a real problem solver for me. So just without any of the modules at all, and then I'll bring them in one by one. Now, this EQ, you're not going to hear a massive difference until we get everything else in there. So just bear that in mind. Just clean things up a little bit. Adding some snap. Again, a little bit of snap. This is where the EQ is happening. This is a really important plugin, because what I found with the SSL console kind of channel strips is that you can go crazy. So I'm adding 15 dB at, what is that, nearly 9 kilohertz, and it doesn't sound bad. It just sounds great. We're adding a high shelf, and this is where a load of the brightness is coming from. With a snare drum like this one that sounds, for the want of a better word, dead, you're going to need to add a load of top end to counteract that. Now, I've been quite fortunate with this because there's not too much spill. I'm not actually using the expander. It's not actually doing anything. If I change the controls, nothing happens. If you do have an issue with spill, then I would always recommend an expander over a gate, because it just does things in a much more natural way. Gates can be good, especially at the moment, because we're seeing loads of like intelligent gate plugins come in. A traditional gate, to me, not bothered. Doesn't interest me because it's just too choppy. You have to automate stuff, whatever. But an expander can be good because it just does things in a slightly more natural way. It doesn't completely mute stuff. It just expands the dynamic range, brings that spill down. And a good way of doing that with this is if you just click this little button here. Very little. Loads. So if that is an issue, you can use that, but back to the processing. So I'm adding a load of bottom end here as well, and I really am like diming these EQs. So I'm giving it 9 dB at 113 hertz. So that's adding a load of that weight. If we just take that back to 0 and then gradually bring it up, you'll hear the snare, just the bottom end just comes back to life. That thwack. And I found that this compressor can be very gentle if you let it be gentle. We haven't got an attack control, that's just kind of built into it. It changes depending on what's going on. The ratio I've got at 4:1 essentially, and the threshold I'm just kind of bringing down until it sounds right. The thing with this kind of processing is that I'm not using anything because I think I should. And that's a really key thing when processing snares, but anything in general, really. You're listening to stuff and you're saying, well, what does this track need? You're not just kind of just saying, well, a snare drum, typically I'm compressing, gating and EQing. You're kind of listening to it and going, well, why are these things in place? And this plugin here is doing such a lion's share of the work, adding a load of bottom end, adding a load of top end. And I've got these two bands in as well. I'm just adding a little bit at 200 hertz, so what's that, 4.5 dB, and then adding a little bit, or maybe quite a lot, 7 dB at 4.8 kilohertz. So the EQ itself is doing a lot. We're adding loads and loads of brightness, and I would say that this plugin is doing absolutely loads of the processing. If we take a listen before and after, really is changing things dramatically. So that's a large portion of the processing, but the icing on the cake comes from some buses that I've got set up here. Now these are, some of them are kind of regular and some of them are a little special sauce that I like putting in. So let's see what they are. Let's take this off, and on the snare bottom mic, just to kind of be completist about this, I've got the SSL channel strip again. I'm not actually doing anything. There's nothing going on at all. If we just take a listen in isolation. Or if I am doing something, then I'm not meaning to do anything. It's just kind of on there because I put it on both mics just to test things out, because I was listening, trying stuff out. But here is where things get really interesting. I've got a drum reverb with a plugin that I'd never opened before I started doing this mix. And I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. It's the Better Maker BM60, so it's like a lexicon kind of thing. It's from Plugin Alliance. And I just think it sounds fantastic. So let's bring these buses in and see what it's doing. So this is just the snare reverb. So when you've got it in the mix, you don't really notice it that much. But when you bring it in, it just adds this kind of expansive thing, this left and right, just a bit of bigness to it. And this is because we're adding a little bit of width, and we're adding, it's on a bus, so it's got the full mix level. We've got a plate, we've got a relatively small plate. It's kind of number 2 out of the 4. This is just the early reflections. And then it's got a short reverb time. So it's not a massive reverb by any stretch of the imagination. Just adding a little bit of dimension. So without it, just a bit of space. Let's bring these other ones in. This is the bomb. Nice. And then let's bring in some of this room as well. So they're just the kind of extra sauce on top, the cherry on the cake. I will say that with this drum bomb, I'm in a bit of a situation at the moment where my Slate Digital plugin subscription has expired, and I'm going through various channels to kind of get it working, but it's not working at the moment. So I've had to go elsewhere. Typically, my drum bomb bus is with some Slate Digital plugins. I use the Bomber, which was why I call it Bomb, and an SSL plugin. But I couldn't use that, so I thought, well, what am I really doing there? It's kind of a transient thing. It's kind of a thickening of the transients and just bringing them up. So I've just gone for Neutron 5 again, and with the transient plugin, and just bringing up a load of the attack. And transient shapers are great for this, for adding some attack to a dead sounding snare drum. If you've got something that doesn't have that attack, A, you need some top end on it because that'll bring up the brightness, and B, you need a transient shaper. Whether it's this one in Neutron 5 or Transient Designer from SPL or, whatever it is, you need that kind of thing there. So just adding that in adds some real snap to it and brings up some of the low end energy. And then after that, I've got something a little bit interesting. Now, Symphony, this is an exponential audio reverb plugin that I really like because it's one of those that does a bit of everything, and it does everything really quite well. Loads and loads of controls on it, which I'm not going to go over now. I've just gone on to a relatively simple preset, Nick's Large Wooden Percussion Room. It was percussion, and I needed something that was roomy, and that sounded like it was going to do the job. So just take a listen to just the room at the moment, and then I'll take off this Oxford or the Sonox inflator and just hear what it's adding. So before the inflator, this is just the reverb. Then I know what you're thinking, it's just adding level. It's not, it's adding crunch. It's adding a little bit of, I don't know what. It's adding a little bit of just vibe, just character. And vibe and character are those words that we can use in audio when it's like we're adding something, but we don't really know what it is. If we're adding top end, then okay, we're adding top end. But if we're adding something that's kind of indescribable, I just call it vibe and character. And that's what this is doing. And that is what this plugin is absolutely fantastic for. Sonox Inflator, big thumbs up, love it. So I just want to take a look at the snare in isolation because I played it to you on its own kind of throughout, but I didn't play it to you without any of these buses and then with. So let's take all these buses off for a moment and all the processing off. I'm going to leave this one on because that's the phase and the transient thing. It's just easier to do. So let's take a listen to it before and after in isolation and then back in the mix. And we've successfully resurrected our completely dead snare drum. Sounding good. Back in the mix. Let's get rid of all the processing and then bring it in. And a lot of that is bringing up the level, but it's really important that we understand that there's a difference between bringing up the level with a volume fader and bringing up the level with EQ. Because I've done a load of boosts on that in that SSL channel strip, and I'm bringing up the stuff that I want. And EQ is like a volume fader for different frequencies, essentially, isn't it? So we want to be able to bring up certain frequencies, and inherently that's going to bring up the overall volume. But to me, it's just a better way of bringing up the volume. You're just bringing up exactly what you want and kind of leaving behind what you don't want. And let me show you something really interesting. When I have this without any of the processing on, just on the snare top, let's look at where it peaks. Minus 10.5, minus 9.8. When I bring all that processing on, it appears louder, but it's actually quieter in terms of the meters. So without any of the processing, 10.5, 9.8 minus. When we bring the processing on, remember that, minus 9.8. Minus 11.7. 2 dB quieter in terms of metering. When we're actually listening to it, we're hearing that it's louder because we're adding the stuff that we want and we're leaving behind the stuff that we don't want. So the stuff that's peaking and getting up to that minus 9.8 is probably the nonsense that we're leaving behind. So it's just a bit of a reminder that meters are good and they're helpful, but your ear should be the real judge. And yeah, we're adding a low level, but we're adding level in the right places. And that's kind of the point. If we just had the snare drum without that processing and we just turned it up, it wouldn't be the same. It sounds kind of naff. And then if we bring it back down again to where it was ish, it's adding more level, but it's doing it in the right places. Hopefully this is going to help you get your dead sounding snare drums and bring them back to life. It's a combination of pretty liberal use of EQ, most importantly, transient shaping, because that's going to add some snap back to your drums, and then buses. I find those reverbs, the two different kind of reverbs, really helpful, but also that bomb where I have just like a parallel transient shaper. I'm really diming that transient shaper and just bringing it all the way up, or nearly all the way up, and really adding a load of snap. It wouldn't sound right if it was on its own, but because you're blending it in parallel on a bus, it sounds fantastic. Hopefully it's been helpful. Let us know what you think, if this has been helpful for your drums, and if there's any other mix issue that you're struggling with, you think I might be able to help with. I'll see you again soon. Take care.